Malkia knew most of the sycophants trying to get the attention of the Psychomancer High Chief. The ridiculous animal tattoos on the men and various embedded jewelry among the women were just unique enough to separate individual from individual as well as worthwhile family from lacking. She was mildly impressed at his ability to ignore the creative praise he was getting from all corners, but understood well enough that he had probably heard it all before. Besides, introspection was highly valued among psychomancers, in spite of how few chose to actually do it properly, and she suspected that such an important person would be among those who actually managed it. Unfortunately, the only magicless serving him were literally at his side, keeping his hair straightened and his robes unwrinkled with their incessant fingers. He was trying to hide it, but Malchia sensed he was bored. Or maybe annoyed. Either way, she wouldn't get much from him now, so she left the fools to their futile game and looked to see what the other high chiefs were doing. She came upon that of the Dracomancers next, and with the relatively small number of them, she probably could have stood out in the crowd without using the Magicless as a ploy, but she was feeling petty enough that her earlier experience left her bitter about Dracomancers. Telling herself that she'd come back if there were no other options, Malkia moved on. She found the Biomancer High Chief, and while that woman had more than her fair share of would-be conversationalists, she was dismissing practically all of them with a few choice words and a wave of her hand. Malkia took a second to admire her. The woman looked her age, a rarity in Bio, and seemed completely unashamed of the fact. That always either indicated a Slaven who thought he or she was doing something worthwhile by refusing to clean themselves up now and again, or someone whose importance or social standing was made so clear by their actions and demeanor that they didn't need to appear proper. Malchia suspected that this was one of the rare latter cases. A magicless girl with Bio's leaf on her otherwise drab animal skin dress stood by a nearby building, looking scared. Malchia was not particularly concerned about the girl's fears. She needed to get through to a high chief, and this girl seemed to be her ticket there. "What's your name?" the Psychomancer asked the Magicless. The girl stared at her, wild-eyed and shaking. Deciding that she didn't have time for this, Malchia opened one of her hands and let the eye glow. Suppress her fear. Make me seem comforting. "Sillery," the girl stated, suddenly calm. Sillery didn't seem particularly impressive by inner standard, but the girl was obviously from Bio and a Magicless, so it only stood to reason that she worked for the High Chief. "Is that your master?" Malchia tilted her head towards said chief. "I think so. My master gave me to her after my time in the laboratories. She watches over me, is what she said." "An experiment?" Although she had heard rumors about what biomancers regularly did to sectants and magicless, she had never thought they would bring one here of all places. "And how is your watcher? Is that what you'd call her?" The Biomancer High Chief was not only unflattering in appearance due to her age, she had another aspect of her character that made others flinch from her and would have turned any other Mancer into a social pariah. More often than not, a handless could be seen by her side. When he wasn't stopping a Psychomancer girl from interrogating the project, anyway. "May I ask what you are doing with the mistress's special work maid?" Malchia turned around to see a man in Biomancer robes with his arms folded behind his back. From the misshapen cuts of his robe, she assumed he was probably either a convicted criminal or a handless, which could have meant she'd ignored him if she hadn't already seen him by the High Chief's side. Not letting a hint of nervousness touch her facial expressions, Malchia responded as if she were describing the weather. "I wanted to know more about your mistress. The education on who the High Chiefs are is rather lacking, and she seemed as if she wasn't in the mood to speak to me herself. I've come to learn that if you want to know something about someone, ask those who serve them. They can sometimes tell you things the master himself wouldn't be able to." The man frowned. What could this magicless possibly know? "About science, nothing. About history, Probably some nonsense about how Mansers are all gods. About foreign countries? If she belonged to anyone besides the High Chief, she probably wouldn't even know they exist. About the people she knows, however, this girl could probably say a lot. Going off of other magic lists, of course. The man's frown deepened. And what has she told you? Nothing of significance. Just that the High Chief wasn't her original master. Something about the laboratories, though I suppose that would make more sense if I'd been raised in Tokyo. There was a subtle change in the man's demeanor. Somehow his obvious displeasure was tinged with a bit of, well, possibly fear. You may speak with my mistress. I will arrange an audience. The only condition is that you must not ask about the magicless girl or the laboratories. After a brief struggle of wills where the High Chief tried to intimidate Malkia with only a stare and a posture, and Malkia returned her actions in kind to indicate that she was not that impressed, the two managed to get along quite well. The younger discussed politics and Psycho. The elder talked about her relations with the Psychomancer High Chief and how annoying he could be. They both mocked the stupider members of the higher castes in their respective societies. By the time the metallic clang of the inexplicable wonder in the center of the city went off, the two could almost be called friends. Not close friends, but the type one forms when away from home for a week that one knows will probably never be seen again, but still holds in his or her heart for a long time afterward. Well, it's time for the newly tested to put on their show. Might as well see what my countrymen are up to. Sometimes it's pretty, I suppose. Malkia had never seen the legendary show, so she was much less aloof than the High Chief, but decided it would be tactical to leave without indicating so. On my end, I'm just glad I spoke to that magicless girl from the laboratories. She had meant it as a sweet and somewhat unique goodbye, so one can imagine her surprise when the High Chief's entire demeanor changed. For the first time in the admittedly brief period she had known her, Malkia saw the woman get even mildly nervous. Don't talk about her. Just go, please. Once more, she thought it would be tactical to obey. Vorf's conversations with the religious did not go as well as he thought they would. They were often willing to talk with him, and even eagerly when they came to the conclusion that he was genuinely interested in what they had to say now than another powermonger. But he found a lot of them with very little to say. All of their theological principles had been heard before. Either they repeated the same lessons anyone who has studied the texts after what was required in school already knew, or they tried to justify the new Akbar, that principle of focusing less on the study of the texts and more of focusing on the love and beauty of Akmar's will. Interestingly enough, Vorf noticed that this latter group spent more time talking about how much they hated the former than about anything lovely or beautiful. While a high-ranking priest from Bio and another from Hydro did get into an interesting debate about what the texts had to say about ethics and the pursuit of knowledge, which Vorf preferred to think he had spurred on, there was very little to get his mind running. The Historical Society was somewhat better. Those few who would talk to an outsider filled his head with all sorts of bizarre factoids about past High Chiefs, theories of what actually caused several major wars, and what they thought about the future of relations with Secta. I think the Mancer communities in the City of All Nations will fail, one informed him without seeming prompt. As you know, our kind needs to spend at least a small amount of our childhood within the borders that hold their magic's respective fallen god. It's why our borders have been consistent for all of recorded history, even under the warlords in Hayaf, regardless of conflict, while sectas have bounced around with various wars, conquests, and land deals. I personally believe that the cost of bringing Mancers back for their growth, particularly the ones who rely on assistance to do so, will overburden the orders and eventually cause everyone to either return to Mansa or grow up magicless. Now this made Vorf think, both about the future and implications of this. What if we sent magicless, along with Mancers? They could maintain a permanent population, while the orders would only have to worry about the overseer class. This historian scoffed at him. The sectons would eat them. Besides, they'd lose respect for us if they're aware of how few members of our population could actually use the magic that frightens them so much. Worf supposed he was right. Before he really had time to contemplate, the metallic gong sounded, and the young Dracomancer decided to see what he had heard was the highlight of the festival. All 12 flags flew over the central square. They maintained a fair distance from one another, enough to have dozens of Mancers from each nation stand before them. To his understanding, the best of each tested class was to put on a performance before the High Chiefs and all of Mansa. While he repeatedly reminded himself that it didn't matter, a small part of him felt an inexplicable pang whenever his thoughts lingered on the fact that he wasn't among the Dracomancers, a pang that somehow grew worse when he noticed how few Dracomancers were there. It looks as if we're back to being the rarest again, a familiar voice noted from behind him. Turning around, Worf was only slightly surprised to see Master Arvin. Thanks to that massive war about 20 years ago or so, there was a while that the Hydromancers were barely showing up. The ones that did were usually colonials. The unnamed. God, you still don't see any middle-aged ones. Worf was familiar with the war in question, but it wasn't until Arvin said something that he realized that the man was right. All the Hydromancers he had seen had either been old or young. If I am to study history, I must notice how it's happening in the present. He had heard those words before, but never really appreciated them. Either way, the present was about to become a bit more interesting. The High Chief of the Pyromancers strolled casually into the center of the square, wearing some elaborate headdress that resembled a cross between a bird of prey and a forest dragon, eyes raised and face clearly ready to go. At the sound of his voice, all conversation ceased. Hundreds of Mancers stood on one side, dozens on the other, and this one Pyromancer had them all looking at him with rapt attention. The histories are unclear about how long ago the Mancer nations came to be. Some say they were born near the beginning of time, not long after the gods fell from their heavenly domain. Some say they came into being only a few centuries ago, after countless decades of runaway magic and chaos. Most say the truth is somewhere in between, that the nations existed, but in forms we wouldn't recognize today. I am here today to tell you it doesn't matter. However old these nations were, whatever their origin, whether it be 1,000-year development or the successful result of 1,000,000 failed experiments, we have done it. We have built a set of orders that can accomplish the impossible, imagine the impossible, and become the impossible. Before you now sits the future of that possibility, the youth that will one day keep Manso moving forward, ensuring that it always shares this greatness that they know today. Without further pomp, allow me to introduce you to the newly tested Aphera. The group of Pheromancers moved forward, creating a beautiful metallic sculpture and making it undergo an incredibly complex dance for the audience, all within the space of a few minutes. Although a few Pheromancer elders seemed unimpressed, the rest oohed and awed appropriately. The Photomancers extended everyone's shadows. They manipulated the passage of the light so that it looked as if the shadows were brawling, and then crying, and then getting involved in an elaborate screwball comedy, eliciting the expected laughter. The Geomancers essentially copied the Pheromancers but with dirt, and Worf felt the applause seemed more out of politeness. The Pyromancers created a battle in the sky between dragons made of moving flame, which elicited a lot from the young and little from the older ones. They do the same tormented thing every year, Arvin explained. Worf would have loved to know what the other groups were doing, but as soon as the Electromancers came up to give their performances, a few metallic objects that Worf could not identify were tossed into the circle. One of the older Electromancers in the crowd asked, "Are they seriously using those?" And that was the only warning anyone received before they all exploded in a flash of blinding light and scorching heat.